Good evening. My name is Joseph Sippets. I'm here for the St. Joseph County Public Library, and it's time for another Saturday night story. Today I'll be reading from the Creepypasta collection, Urban Legends You Can't Unread. It's a library book, yes. And the story I'll be reading by Rana Veslar is called Down in the Basement. I will eliminate a few naughty words and adult situations ever so slightly. So let us begin. Running a library is not an easy thing to do. You'd be surprised at the number of people who think that all librarians do is sit around and read all day. They have no concept of all the duties that come with being a librarian. It's just one day, in just one day, my mother will teach a class of senior citizens how to use a computer, help 4 different families find the graves of their loved ones, register 1,000 new books into the system, reorder all the books that had been returned, hold a story time session for children, and the list goes on and on. The point of me telling you this is for you to understand that it takes a person with a degree and years of experience to run a library, and I am not that person. My mom has run our small town's library for over 20 years. She's damn good at what she does, and she's the only reason the town still has a library. Unfortunately, this meant that it was difficult to replace her even for a short amount of time when she fell down the basement stairs and broke her leg. I should have suspected something was up when she called me home. I'm a freelance writer, so it's not difficult for me to come back to rural Minnesota at a moment's notice. You'll understand, however, that I don't do it very often. I rarely have a shred of desire to return to my hometown. And I need you to watch over the library for me until I can get back to work. When my mom said that, it wasn't a request so much as an order. It was easy to tell from the set look in her eyes that she had already mentally decided that I would be taking over for her, regardless of any request of mine. As the librarian's daughter, I knew better than anyone how difficult her job was. I blanched when she asked me and said, "Mom?" And I said, "Mom, there's no way. I don't know how to register books. I don't know how to use the system." My mom waved her hand dismissively. "That's not a problem, and you won't have to register any books. Just check them out, which you've done before. Another librarian from Rocks County will be coming once a week to register any new books and fix anything you might have screwed up." I wanted to scowl at this, but I held back mostly because it was true. For the most part, I need you to deal with patrons. Help them find books, help them with research, keep the computers up and running. You do realize that you're asking me to do the impossible, I deadpanned. My mom sighed. "Look, I know this isn't ideal, but it's only for a few weeks until my leg is better. I just need you to keep things afloat. You know, if there was anybody qualified to do this, I'd ask them. As it is, you're the closest to the qualified librarian this town has besides me. You've grown up with a library, and you know all the basics and how it all works. You can do this." I gave my mom a skeptical look, and she just returned it with an encouraging smile. I sighed as she began to give me the rundown on my duties as her stand-in. There were so many details that I actually had to take notes. By the 4th or 5th page, I was convinced that she was setting me up for failure. "Just do your best and you'll be fine," she said. Yeah, right. The first day at the library was utter and complete hell, mixed in with some chaos and a healthy dose of self-loathing. I followed my mom's instructions to the letter, but even that was paltry comfort. Make sure you have a story time in the morning. It starts promptly at 9 a.m. Usually I love kids, but not when I'm the one that has to try to keep them in line, and they never stop talking. And it took me 15 minutes to get to the 4th page of a stupid picture book I picked out, something about a dumb jellyfish that lost its glasses. Jellyfish don't even need glasses. Try to run a virus scan on each computer before noon. If one computer goes down, the rest are sure to follow, trust me. Of course, it would be my luck that the computers would all crash on my first day. I called in the town's IT guy, a man from across the county who proved to be distinctly unhelpful. "I can probably get in to fix them later this week," he said. Oh, perfect. Computerless for a week. I don't remember what exactly I told him, but apparently my threats were threatening enough that to get him in within an hour. He carefully avoided me as he fixed the computers. Some patrons might need help with genealogy research. Just do the best you can. Even with the websites my mom provided, it was sure impossible to find these people. My great-great-grandmother's name was Ethel. Can you help me find her? I can try. What's her last name? Oh, I'm not sure. But I know she lived in a red house. I see. Any other information? She was a witch. I was trying to find her spell book. Right. Some kids will probably be coming in to find books for school. They have a reading program in school, and they have to read a certain number of points in the semester by reading books at their level. Make sure to get them books appropriate for their age and reading level. What do you mean? My son shouldn't read A Clockwork Orange, screamed the soccer mom, her long manicured nails tapping at the library desk. Her 8-year-old son stood a little ways away, browsing the sports books. It's just not age appropriate, ma'am. I'll have you know my son's a damn smart, and he could read whatever he wants. Ma'am, about half the book is about rape and the other half is about murder, I said, losing patience. What? She creaked, throwing the book down at the counter in disgust. Why on earth would the school recommend such filth? And why do you offer it here? Really, I expect more from a public institution like this. Like I said, the first day was exceptionally long and brutal. The days weren't much better. There were a few odd instructions that my mom had given me before sending me on my doomed mission. They were so strange, in fact, that I'd asked the hospital if they'd checked my mom for a concussion because she was obviously talking nonsense. She had to be. Every night, after you lock up, go down to the library basement. Make sure to take along a book of your choice. It can be anything. Then you'll need to sit down there and read aloud for at least half an hour. I blinked as I stared at my mom, giving me a stern look from the hospital bed. Am I supposed to record this or... No, don't worry about that. Just go down and read. Mom, there's nothing down there. It's true, the basement was a decrepit dust fest, complete with bare concrete floor and rows of useless crap that had never been thrown away for some odd reason or another. It doesn't matter if there is or isn't anything down there. You just do what I said, understand? She was rarely so harsh with me, so I agreed, making a big show of writing it down. She relaxed. Make sure you lock the doors before you leave and leave one light on, the one by the front desk. If you remember, leave some candy behind too. She must have seen the look I was giving her because she said, I know all this seems a bit odd to ask, but it's very important to me, all right? I couldn't say I was sure that my mother was completely sane or that she hadn't conked on her head hard enough to drive logic out the window. But she was looking at me this way, it was the most important part of my job. And so I resigned. I gave a resigned nod and said, all right. The practice, however, was much harder in theory, mostly because I really hated going into that basement. The first night I went down, I grabbed my copy of Wuthering Heights, one of my favorite books. I descended the stairs, flicking them on as I went. There was only one functioning light in the basement. A bare bulb hung from the ceiling that illuminated a tiny circular spot on the floor. I felt like I was stepping into a spotlight as I sat down in the chair my mother must have placed there. I sat in total silence and cleared my throat. It was strange being there all alone. I didn't like it. But I had a job to do, and so I set the timer on my phone for 30 minutes and started reading. I stumbled a little at the beginning, the words jumbling together on their way out of my mouth, but soon I found my groove, and the narrative flowed just fine, my voice carrying throughout the damp basement. It made me nervous, the way I broke the silence. It seemed wrong. I could feel my pulse hammering hard in my throat, and I began to wish that I had just ignored my mother's instructions. I'm stupid. This is stupid. I am stupid for doing this stupid thing. Stupid. As I kept reading, I gradually became aware of the feeling that somebody was watching me. Of course, I'd feel that way. I mean, I was sitting in this creepy old basement all alone with barely even a light to keep me company, my voice echoing off the cement walls in solitude. It was completely normal that I would begin feeling creeped out, and as though I wasn't really alone. Normal, but that didn't mean I liked it. I was startled when my phone roared into life its jingly sound at the end of the 30 minutes. Swallowing hard, I silenced the offending object and raced up the stairs, suddenly feeling that something was going to slither out and drag me back down if I wasn't careful. I slammed the basement door shut. I ran through the library, finishing everything as quickly as I could. I left the light on over the front desk. I brought a candy bar during lunch, a Milky Way, if you must know, and I left it on the desk. It looked like an offering to something. I couldn't stop shaking. I ran out the front door and locked it, checked and rechecked, making sure that I hadn't made a mistake. I won't lie, I was relieved after locking it, as though the extra barrier between myself and the basement would save me from something. It took me a full 10 minutes before I was calm enough to climb into my car and drive to my parents' house, where my mom and dad had set up my old room for as long as I'd be running the library. Dad was at the hospital with Mom, who hadn't come home yet, so I had the home to myself. I got drunk that night, prying open my dad's liquor cabinet and drinking whatever I had laid eyes on. I threw on some stupid sitcom and sat in the living room, all the lights on and blanket drawn around me like a suit of armor. So ended the absolute worst first day of a job I've ever had. That first week was anything but easy. On Tuesday, I made a kid cry during story time. On Wednesday, I caught one of the patrons trying to watch porn on a computer. On Thursday, the Town Pervert came in specifically to harass me, and I had to threaten him with the police, and he started bragging about himself. On Friday, it rained, and the roof leaked, ruining about a dozen good books that would have to be replaced. The one thing got easier, at least, was the basement. At first, I'd been so confused as to why my mother had asked me to do these strange rituals. It was like she was trying to assuage some spirit or something. The moment that that thought occurred to me, I realized what was happening. My mother, you see, is a big believer in ghosts. The library always had its share of bad luck, lights going on their own, computers crashing, etc. And she must have started to believe that it had its own little haunting. Perhaps perhaps she thought that if I read to it and gave it offerings, things would go smoothly. After that, my nightly rituals actually became kind of fun. I started to imagine that the ghost my mom was communicating with was another young woman, just like me. I picked out books that I thought she might like, i.e. books I liked, and put more feeling into my readings. Occasionally, I'd find myself talking to her absent-mindedly throughout the day. In the end, I started even believing that she might be there. It started with the candy. As per my mother's request, I'd buy the elusive little spirit something as an offering. I started out with chocolate, and I'd throw it away in the morning. One night, however, I brought a bag of Skittles, and the next morning it was gone. I'd scoured the library looking for some sign of the candy, but it was just gone. From then on, I started buying all different kinds of treats, seeing if I could get different results. Chocolate was usually left behind, but hard candies were almost always gone by the next day. After about 3 weeks, I decided that yes, there was a ghost, and I was beginning to understand its preferences. Maybe it seems like that I'm being a little too cavalier about all this. After all, it's not every day that people decide they're dealing with ghosts and start messing around with them. Of course, you have to remember that I hadn't actually seen any ghosts. I just imagined that they must be there. To me, it was something of a game. I got to play make-believe, and some forces that be played along. It was fun, if a little strange. Then, that all changed one night, just after closing, when I made the mistake of letting down my guard. Everyone in town knew that the library closed at 8 p.m. on Thursdays, and that day was a Thursday, and it was already 8:30, and I was choosing a book. I just decided on Little Women when I heard the bells above the door jingle and somebody step into the library. Now, I hadn't locked the door yet because, well, I didn't think I needed to. I can already hear you guys telling me how stupid I am, but cut me a little slack. After all, it's a small town and nothing ever happens in small towns, right? Guess again. I peered out from the bookshelf I was standing near and saw the Town Pervert walking toward me. He had this big grin on his face, and immediately I was on high alert. Let me give you a quick rundown how this guy looks. He's massive, and I don't mean fat. He's ridiculously tall, with a fair amount of muscle bulging out of his ill-fitting and stained clothing. He lacked the capacity to understand personal hygiene, apparently, because his hair was always greasy and his breath smelled like the inside of a bat cave. He had a bad habit of getting inside a person's personal space. It disgusted me. My mom had always warned me about this guy. We'll call him Chad. Sorry, Chad. For the sake of anonymity. You see, Chad would try to mess anything that moved, regardless of age or circumstance. He'd been around since I was a kid, and he'd often tried to convince me and my older sister to come to his house and talk with him. Just for a moment, he had something nice to give us. He'd gotten kicked out of the library several times in the past for hitting on minors or my mom herself. He had no sense of decency. And at that moment, I was alone with him. "You still working here for your ma, Cassie?" he asked easily, his steps not slowing as he approached me. I took a few instinctive steps backward, putting the desk between us as a barrier. Not that he wouldn't work his way around it. I wondered if I'd be able to grab the mace from my purse. "You know I am, Chad," I snapped, already annoyed with him. "You know you're not supposed to be here after hours either. You need to leave now." He gave me an easy smile. "I just want to talk to you. We're friends, aren't we?" I felt the heave in my stomach at those words. I scanned my work area for my purse, but remembered all too late that it wasn't there. I left it in the car. "No, we're not friends, and if you don't leave now, I'm going to call the cops." Not that calling the cops would do much good. The reason why people like Chad still exist is because small communities, the cops there were junk. So I reached for the phone anyways because I don't make threats I don't intend to keep. Chad's polite mask slipped off then, as I knew it would. I'd been smart enough to hightail it out of there when I made my threat, but my hope was clearly misplaced, especially when there was no witnesses to his behavior. In a moment, he was halfway over the desk, and I shrieked and stumbled backward just out of his reach as he lumbered toward me. I was in absolute panic. I ran down the stairs to the basement, fumbling and falling the last few steps, sprawling out on the concrete. A deep pain flared in my arm as I landed on it, and I knew instantly that something was definitely sprained, maybe broken. I could hear Chad pounding on the stairs. I crawled into the darkness, my legs shaking too hard to support myself. I had just about made it past the little circle of light. He must have turned it on when he came down, when his hand shot out and caught me by the ankle. He was freakishly strong, although I shouldn't have been surprised. He clamped his hand down so hard I thought he might actually snap my ankle bone. I screamed again and tried to pull myself away from him. He muttered, falling on top of me and pinning me down. And just then, I got the feeling again, the feeling of being watched. This time it was much stronger than before, and I instantly froze, suddenly feeling a great danger surrounding me, a danger other than Chad. The air in the basement seemed to have dropped a good 10 degrees when I could see puffs of his rotten breath forming above me. On instinct, I began to strain my eyes, looking past his hulking body into the darkness. There, in the darkness, something was moving. It was as though the darkness in the room had become liquid, and it was shifting and twisting. My breath caught in my throat, and I barely felt Chad on me. I had gone silent when I sensed the disturbance, but now I began making strange wheezing noises as the liquid darkness moved toward us. Chad didn't ask if I was okay or what was wrong. I don't think he even noticed, but he never saw it. But I did. It had black fur and was probably why I'd never seen it before. Its body was absolutely massive, pushed along by 4 long, spindly legs. It looked like something like a spider, but for the way it walked, its body was obviously heavy because the legs did little more than drag it forward, its body scraping along the ground. I noticed that its legs ended in a sharp claw, making each into something of a spear. I couldn't scream. I wanted to, but I couldn't. As I lay under the body, I saw one of its front legs snap forward. It had been lumbering toward us so slowly that I almost thought it was incapable of speed. Apparently I was wrong, because in the time it took for me to blink, its leg had managed to spear through Chad's chest, poking through the other side, showering me in blood. I gagged. Chad's eyes were wide open, staring at me in utter confusion, as though he thought that I was the one that did this. In reality, I was just as surprised as he was, especially when the leg began to split apart into smaller appendages, goring him from the inside. In absolute horror, I crawled backward, bumping into some boxes behind me. The creature drags Chad's still struggling body backward toward its bulk before retracting its limb. With careful, great effort, it pulled itself up on its legs. Now I could see its belly. Well, what should have been its belly. I watched its fur pull back to reveal several rows of jagged yellow teeth, pointed just slightly outward. Its maw was larger than my torso, and I watched it as it lowered itself down on top of Chad. I'm glad I couldn't see what exactly those teeth did to him. Most of my vision was blocked by the black furry body, but I did manage to see the blood. An amount of red that covered the floor and coated the beast gave me a pretty good idea of what was happening. I seem to recall that Chad's screams went on for a lot longer than I expected them to. Eventually, the thing finished feeding. Its sickening crunch of Chad's bones stopped, and it settled on the floor once more. Its legs began to drag its body forward, and it crawled to me. Tears were coursing down my cheeks, and I thought about what had happened to Chad. I had never actually planned on what kind of death I'd wanted, but I knew this wasn't it. I was shaking so hard, the boxes behind me started to rattle, and the thing crawled toward me at an agonizingly slow pace. It stopped in front of me. I found myself frantically searching for eyes, but found none. I had an awful moment where I thought maybe it could smell me, and then something amazing and unbelievable happened. It lifted itself up just a bit, spit out a wrapper. A Skittles wrapper. There was a long moment where neither of us moved. The black creature was waiting for me to do something, and I was waiting to do it. Eventually, I mustered up enough courage to reach forward. I picked up the wrapper. As soon as I did, it turned itself around, dragged its heavy body back to the corner it had been hiding in. I sat there for a long moment, staring alternately at the wrapper and at the mess of blood that the beast had left on the floor, splattered with the occasional eyeball or tooth. I stared and thought. Eventually, I stood up. I walked on shaky legs up the stairs to the young adults' aisle. Plucking Little Women from the shelf, I walked back down to the basement. Riding the chair that had been tipped over during my struggle with Chad, I sat down, and in a surprisingly steady voice, I began to read. It was about 2 weeks later that my mom was cleared to come back to work. Well, cleared might have been a poor term. It was actually more like she ordered the doctor to give his consent for her to return to work. Otherwise, she was going to find him and kill him in his sleep. Something like that, to that effect. Hey, the women in my family are scary. What can I say? I decided to stick around a few more weeks, helping my mom out as she got back to her daily routine. She observed me carefully, probably trying to decide if I knew what she thought I knew. One night, as we were closing, she asked me, "Did something happen to Chad? He usually comes in at least once a day, and I haven't seen him at all since I've been back." I shrugged, thinking about of the hour I'd spent cleaning up the basement so there'd be no trace of the incident. "Guess I don't know. Maybe he decided to skip town." "Does look that way, doesn't it?" she said, watching me closely. After a moment of silence, she said, Would you like to read tonight, or should I? I answered her with a grin that told her everything she needed to know. I think I'll do it tonight. I still need to finish Little Women. My mom smiled at me, knowing that she'd found a fellow conspirator. I knew I should go back to my writing, but I'm finding it a bit hard to leave the library now. After all, it's not every day that you meet a new friend.